At about 8 p.m. last night, I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our early 20s, neither of us own cars. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is this Aussie version of an Oyster card, basically an automatic ticket system for public transport, so walking was our only option. It's summer over here, so it's still fairly well lit, and we were walking down the main road, so we weren't too concerned. We finally arrive at this cafe and sit down. I was paying, but I only had my credit card. And, sure enough, it was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I just gestured to her to stay put and guard the spot while I went to get cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there's ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station about a block away. I'm doing a light jog, so I don't keep Sally waiting, when a balding, sweating guy, probably in his late 40s with a tank top and no shoes, comes pacing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked behind me for about 100 meters. At the time, I didn't really think much of it. The gas station was the next building along. It seemed like he had just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it wasn't the witching hour, so I just assumed that he was going to the station like me. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered the tiny convenience store, nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I looked around for an ATM they sometimes have inside. No such luck though, so I go up to the man in his 30s at the desk and reluctantly ask if they're able to do cash out. He smiles and says,
"Of course,"
and then asks,
is he with you?"
I have no idea who he's talking about at first, and then he points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door or anything. He was drifting in the space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps to the storefront, seemingly aimlessly. I just assumed that he was on drugs or something. I tell the clerk no, not thinking much of it at all. He says,
"Oh, he was staring at you before. I thought he might have been your dad or something."
I laugh it off. I honestly wasn't concerned at all. He was still ambling around outside, and I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thank the clerk for the cash, but before I turn away to leave, he says,
Just wait and see if he leaves first."
We wait for a few minutes in silence, and the guy begins to pace back and forth directly against the front wall of the store, looking straight ahead and never into the store. It still looked like the man was just on a drug-induced amble and seemed harmless. Not once did I catch his gaze, so I figured it would be safe to just slip out of the door and walk back to the cafe in the fairly bright light of dusk, especially since Sally was texting me at this point, asking, "Where are you?" I thank the guy at the desk once again for his concern, assure him that I don't know the guy and am not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store, and head for the door. The clerk asks if I want him to walk out with me. I say that I should be alright, and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline for me from the other end of the building. I seriously didn't think much of the guy at all up until this point, but for the first time, he was briskly walking in a straight line towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up and I start power walking so that he doesn't think I'm actively trying to escape him, still trying to convince myself that I'm just being paranoid and should be more casual. I don't look behind me to see how close he is. I've reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps when I hear the clerk run outside. He's yelling at me.
"Go! Run! Run!"
I make a break for it, looking over my shoulder. He's grabbed the man by his shoulders from behind. The balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's just watching me run away. I keep running until I've crossed the road, and then I turn around, standing still. The clerk is still just holding onto the odd staring man. The clerk and I are just looking at each other in bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go, and I gesture my thanks. I got back to Sally with the cash and bought food, before walking back home a different way. A lot of Hispanics believe that babies see their guardian angels and or spirits. Growing up, my parents would always tell us stories of children speaking to ghosts or spirits of family members who have already passed on. I've encountered some tough stuff and shit that has scared me shitless. I distinctly remember my great-great-grandmother talking to me when I was about 4 or 5 years old in my room. She would tell me in Spanish that everything will be okay. She would sing a song and then leave. At that point in time, my parents were going through a nasty separation because my dad cheated with a much younger teenager. Later on in life, I told my mother while discussing my parents' breakup about my great-great-grandmother Layla being the only person who could keep me calm during the fights and arguments. My mother literally just stood there, trying to figure me out, studying my face for a few minutes, saying nothing. Then she said, "You never met your grandmother Layla. She passed a few months before you were born." And I swore up and down that it was her who would sit and talk to me singing in Spanish. That's when again my mother explained to me about children being sensitive to the afterlife. Fast forward now, I have a child of my own. He'll be 3 months old tomorrow. My son is a very giggly baby, always laughing at someone and very aware already. Recently he was blessed by my grandmother because he's about to be baptized, and that's when things started getting weird. In the beginning, my son would laugh at the wall. This would go on for spans of 10 to 15 minutes. My boyfriend would get creeped out and I would joke saying that he's playing with angels. Even my boyfriend's mother, who watches him, realized that he laughs at the blank wall for a while. But it was always harmless, until 5 days ago. I went to pick up my son from his grandmum's house. We're all sitting there talking, and once again my son is babbling to the wall. Nothing too crazy, when out of nowhere my son started screaming and crying hysterically, still looking at the wall. My mother-in-law said it's probably just gas, he's okay, so I assume so. This happened for 2 more days. My son would be fine, staring into oblivion, and then make this face out of sheer shock and fear and start screaming and crying. It takes every ounce of me to soothe him and make him stop crying. Eventually I take him to the doctors to make sure he isn't gassy. They run the test and nothing comes up. He isn't colic, he isn't teething, he's fine. Perfectly healthy. But now it's gotten worse. Last night it was just me and my son home alone. My boyfriend works 2 jobs, so he's gone for most of the time. Around 7 p.m, I heard a constant knocking on my door. I thought it was next door initially because no one ever comes in unannounced. I walk into my hallway and I hear it coming from downstairs. So then I think it's the UPS because I ordered something. I look out my window and nothing, not even a parked car outside. And then I realize that UPS doesn't deliver that late. I'm now sitting in the hallway while listening to this constant knocking while texting my boyfriend. This whole time my son is asleep. Then out of nowhere, the knocking stops after 15 minutes of off and on again. From the corner of my eye, I see a shadow, then a blood-curdling cry from my son. I run over to him and he's literally red in the face from screaming, and he has a weird mark on his forehead. I assumed it was from scratching himself while crying. I called my boyfriend to come home during his break. He came home right away because I was hysterical. Once my boyfriend gets home, he checks the house and nothing was out of the ordinary. He goes to both neighbors and neither have seen someone knocking. He comes back in and tells me that it's okay. I sum it up as my imagination and my boyfriend heads back to work. He tells me if anything else happens to call him and he'll come right back. A few hours later, I'm putting my son down to sleep for the night and I hear a big thud downstairs and what sounds like someone pacing back and forth. I text my boyfriend and ask him if he's downstairs, and his reply is no. I just sat there listening after because the noise had stopped. Again, I'm like maybe it's just next door. They have a few kids and they play a lot. Then, once again, my son was woken up from his sleep in a terrifying scream. I noped the hell out of the house with my son in hand. I refuse to go back in until it's blessed or saged or something changes. I called my boyfriend once again, and he came and searched the house while I sat in the car with the baby. I seriously don't know what to do. I don't want to seem irrational or crazy, but I know my son and it's scary to think that something can be happening to him. I seriously am over it all. Before I begin, I would like to say that I was quite young when this happened. About 6 years ago now, I was living in a house that I assumed was haunted. Well, at least that's what people said, anyway. It was New Year's night, and my parents were throwing a party at our house. All was fun and good music, and good friends. A few personal friends of mine brought some candy, and my parents gave us fizzy peach flavoured water, pretending it was champagne. My friends and I decided to go up into the attic where it was the most quiet. We started drinking the fizzy water, and not too long after, my friend we call Alfred brought up the wise idea to dare my friend, Samantha, to sleep in the attic. She then proceeded saying, "I'll sleep up here if she sleeps up here." Then I said, "I'll sleep up here if Alfred stays up here." So we ended up bringing up mattresses and a few sleeping bags and pillows up to the attic. By this time, the party had ended and everyone had gone home. All was well and good until, I'd say, what felt like 3 hours passed. My friend and I were playing Final Fantasy VII on our PSPs we had at the time, and Samantha was in and out of it every now and again. But then, suddenly, we started hearing footsteps coming from the other side of the attic, towards us. I shone my PSP screen towards where it was coming from, but to no avail. There wasn't enough light to see anything further than a few feet away. Alfred looked confused and reached for the light, and almost as soon as he got 1 inch away from touching the switch to turn it on, we heard a blood-curdling scream that went on and on for a few seconds. Alfred then proceeded to turn on the light after realizing what just happened. By this time, Samantha was awake and scared as hell, trying to figure out what was going on. My parents, in their hangover panic, ran up to the attic fearing for our safety, only to see that we were fine. I explained to them what happened, but they didn't believe me. My friends and I then went to my room and slept with the lights on. Now, before anyone says that someone probably went up there while we weren't looking, where we were situated, if anyone had come up there, we would have definitely seen them. And this wasn't the only thing that happened. For this next part, I'll have to explain a little bit about the layout of the 3rd floor of my house. There were 2 staircases leading up, one from the 2nd floor to the 3rd and the 3rd to the 4th floor. Between the one from the 2 staircases, there was about 6 inches of wall, so when you walk up to go to the 4th floor, you will see the bottom of the other stairs. I had to walk up the stairs to get to my room, and every time I did, I swore that there was something down there. It was looking up at me from the dark. I rarely had the bravery to look down there, and I would actually run from my living room to my room every time I went up during the night, because I always felt like I was being watched. But every time I did, it looked like there was a figure there in the corner of my eye. I can't exactly explain what it looked like, but the only things I took note of was that it was the color blue. My sister claims to have seen it too, and she called it the Blue Girl. Every time I ask her about that house now, she always tries to change the subject. I still don't know if it's because she was scared of it, or if there is something more that she just doesn't want to talk about. This happened when I was 13, and it's something that I've never forgotten. We had just moved into a brand new house in a brand new housing development. A lot of the houses around us were either unfinished or had families that had just moved in. Behind our house was a lot of field, mostly for more future houses. We lived in a fairly safe small city, and the housing development was very quiet, so for the first few years we lived there, we never bothered to lock the doors. Even at night most of the time, it just wasn't something we thought about. My parents had just put in hardwood floor, so the house was a pretty echoey single story. One night, as I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep, I thought I heard the back sliding glass door open. I was up late on the internet, but everyone else was asleep, so the house was really quiet. I had my door slightly open so my cat could come and go, and so I knew that I was definitely hearing something. I froze, hoping it wasn't the door, but a moment later, I heard it slide shut. Then I began to hear what sounded like heavy shoes walking across the hardwood floor. It was a very specific sound, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe. The footsteps were slow and quiet, like they were trying to make as little noise as possible, but because the floor was wood and our house had high ceilings, the steps echoed down the hallway to my room. Then I heard them stop, the sound of the hallway closet being opened, and then the door quietly clicking shut, like they turned the knob, pulled the door closed, and then released the doorknob once it was in place. It was silent after that. My heart was beating so fast and I began crying. The only way to my parents' room was up the hallway. Their door was only about 20 feet away from where the hallway closet was. I was frozen, and I honestly thought that I would pee my pants. I was so scared. However, it was silent for long enough that I knew I had to go get my dad. So I stood up and walked sock-footed to my door. I stood there for a long time, breathing. And then I ran. It's not a long hallway, but I went as fast as I could. I got inside their room and tried to wake my dad up. "Dad! Dad!" I was frantically whispering. "Huh?" He was half asleep. "Dad!" "What?" "Dad, I think there's someone inside the house." "What?" "Get up! I think there's someone inside the house." "There's no one in here. Go back to sleep." "Yes, there is." I start crying. That gets him up. My mum also wakes up at this point as well, so they both get out of the bed. My dad, sure there's no one in the house, doesn't even grab something as a weapon, but I followed behind him as he leaves the room. He goes into the living room, passes the closet, turns on all the lights in the house. I remember standing in the living room, knowing exactly where this person was and not being able to say anything. He tells me, "Look, there's no one." He doesn't check the closet though, and I don't tell him to. I'm so afraid that whoever is in there will jump out with a knife and kill my dad in front of me, and 13-year-old me keeps thinking that I can't be the one responsible for my dad's death. So I say nothing, and I don't tell him to check the closet. I don't know why he didn't, because if I were a dad, I would have. He locks the front door and tells me to go back to bed. They wait until I'm back in my room before they close their own bedroom door and go back to sleep. Again, the house is silent and I'm laying there, afraid because that person is still in here, in the one place that he didn't look. And suddenly, I hear the closet door open, just as slowly and as quietly as before. Then, the footsteps again. I could hear them so clearly, walking towards the kitchen where the back door is. And then, they stop. That's followed by the sound of the back door being slid open and then quietly being pushed closed again. I hear the back door click into place, and then the house is silent. I'm laying there, crying and breathing, but hearing them leave the house, I felt instant relief. I was still shaking with fear though. I give it a few minutes, hoping that they wouldn't come back, and they don't. So after a bit, I sneak out there. My one and only thought is to lock the back door, which I managed to do. But the scariest part was that when I looked at the hall closet, the door wasn't closed anymore. It was cracked because they hadn't bothered to close it after they left, though I know that it was definitely closed when my dad was out there with me. I tried bringing it up with them years later, and they still didn't believe me. I guess that's just something that they don't want to hear. When I was 20 and attending school, I lived in a college town a couple of hours away from where the rest of my family lived. This resulted in many weekend trips back home, usually with my boyfriend, now husband, who grew up in the same small town as I did. This particular time, my boyfriend had to work over the weekend, but I still wanted to visit for some reason. I picked up my shit and my dog and headed out. It was early in the morning, maybe 7 or so on a Saturday, so not many people were at the gas station. This was good as I wanted to grab breakfast and needed to pump some gas, and I've never been one to leave my dog in my car for too long. My dog, Luna, was about a year old at this time and weighed about 100 pounds, a huge baby. She just loves snuggles and is a total mama's girl. Anyway, she takes up the entire back row of my tiny Chevy Cavalier and was chilling while I pumped gas and quickly ran inside for some breakfast. I come out a few minutes later, Pop-Tarts and soda in hand. I noticed that an older man has made his way over to my car from a beat-up truck and is watching Luna in the back seat. Having grown up in a small town, I'm used to people making conversation for no reason, so I do the cool-ass head nod as I walk over. He turns to me and starts making conversation, asking about Luna.
Is that an Irish wolfhound?
I obviously look confused. I'm a huge animal lover and foster and volunteer for the Humane Society. Luna looks nothing like an Irish wolfhound. No, I told him. Great Pyrenees. I stand facing him, my arms crossed and watching Luna in the back seat.
Pretty dog, pretty owner.
He gives this huge creepy grin and moves closer to me. Not threatening really, but just invading my personal space. I try to smile and thank him. I really need to get going.
Wait, can I pet your dog?
I thought it was such an odd request that I found myself lying. No, sorry. She doesn't like strangers. I should really go. I go to get into the driver's seat of the car when suddenly Luna starts going ballistic. I turn and hear the click of the door opening, and I realize that I accidentally left the back door unlocked. The guy was going to pet my dog, whether I told him he could or not, apparently. Luna is absolutely freaking out, foaming at the mouth, snarling and barking. She lunges for his hand, and the guy takes his hand back quickly. I jump out of the car and shove myself in between him and my dog, going into protective mama bear over my 100-pound fluff ball.
You need to get the fuck away.
I tell him loudly enough, just in case the one other person in the parking lot can hear me. He doesn't listen and starts yammering in and on about how he just wants to pet the dog and will not leave. So I let Lou out of the car. My normally sweet dog turned into an absolute hellhound, snapping at the guy and growling and barking. Finally, he backed off and I hurriedly got Luna into the car and locked the doors, peeling out of the parking lot. I have no idea what he wanted with petting my dog, or why he opened the car door without my permission. All I know is that he yelled something about seeing me later as I left, and I have never felt so weirded out by a stranger in my life. Needless to say, I was glad I brought Luna along. She was treated to a cheeseburger at our lunch stop. I never travelled alone without her, ever since. This happened about 6 months ago. I was 22 at the time, and my daughter was only 4. I lived in a 2-story house with just me, my daughter, and my husband. I was taking at-home classes to be an iPhone specialist, starting at 5 p.m. and ending at 10 p.m. Monday to Friday. My husband had left for his 2 weeks of training he does every year for the military, so it's just me, my daughter, and our pit bull mix, Mavis. I had just finished my classes for the week and had the weekend free, so I decided to go to my mother's house until Sunday. So I packed up my stuff and my daughter's stuff, and we went for the weekend. We returned home Sunday to find that someone had broken into our home. There are muddy footprints and windows open, but nothing was missing. I was going to call the police, but my sister's husband explained that the cops wouldn't do anything. Nothing happened that night, but the next day, my mother came over to pick my daughter up so I could do my classes without worrying what she was into. They left and I went to watch the class upstairs. I put my headphones on so I can hear my instructor teach the class. But I swear I keep hearing stuff downstairs. I even texted my mum and told her that I heard stuff downstairs and it was really creeping me out. But she assured me that it was probably just Mavis because everything was locked up tight and no one could get in. I agreed, thinking that I was probably just freaking myself out. I continued listening to my instructor teach and I swear I heard footsteps on the stairs. So I hurry up and take my headset off and listen. I didn't hear anything. I walked down the stairs and didn't see anything either, so I went back to class. At 10 p.m, my class was over, and my mum decided to just keep my daughter for the night. I was doing my homework with Mavis upstairs with me, and all of a sudden, she started barking and growling and ran downstairs. Now, Mavis usually barks and growls at the slightest noise outside, so I didn't think much of it. But I decided I should check it out anyway because of what happened while I was at my mother's. Again, nothing out of the ordinary, so I went back upstairs. I was finally done with homework and it's about midnight, so I went downstairs and called my mum like I do every night. We were talking and I decided to open my daughter's door and peek my head in. I don't know why I did this because my daughter was at my mum's for the night, but it was just habit, I guess. I should have mentioned earlier that when you look into my daughter's room, her bed is on the far wall a good ways away from the door, so you can clearly see under her bed. So I opened the door and, to my horror, a man was under her bed. I just froze and didn't move, just stood there in shock. After what felt like minutes, I slowly shut the door and whispered into the phone to my mum that there's a man in my house under my daughter's bed. My mum was terrified and she screamed at me to get outside and to stay on the phone with her. She had my brother call the police, so I ran outside with Mavis and waited for the police to arrive. They came in about 3 minutes and searched my house and found no one, but they discovered my bathroom window was open and they happened to shine their light at the living room window, and I could clearly see 2 huge handprints where they slid the window down. The cops waited for my mum and brother to get there, and while we were waiting, they told me about this man that usually stays 2 houses down from mine with his parents. Both of his parents have a pretty bad drug habit, and this guy has been known to put women into the hospital and tried to kill some. What scares me even more is, since we have bought this house, my daughter has been terrified and always told my mum that she wanted to stay with her because it wasn't safe at mummy's house. I didn't think too much of it because I thought maybe it was just a new place, and you know how kids are with new places. After this whole thing happened, I stayed with my mum until my husband came home. We decided to ask our daughter about the house, and what she told me absolutely terrified me. She said that at night, while her and Dad and I sleep, monsters came to her window and tried to get in. She said it was a boy and girl monster. The next day, we installed alarms on all of the windows and security lights. I can't stop questioning why. Why was this man under my daughter's bed? Was he waiting for me to go to sleep? Was he waiting for my mum to bring my daughter back home and for me to put her to bed? I get sick to my stomach thinking about what could have happened. This is undoubtedly the most terrifying experience that I've encountered in my life thus far. I was 8 or 9 at the time and staying with my sister and my 2 cousins, 1 girl and 1 boy, at our grandparents' house. They live in the desert in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, but we spend almost every weekend all together at their house. I have never had anything happen there until this experience. The 4 of us decided to sleep over in the living room as there was more space for all of us to lay. The living room was small, but still managed to fit 2 long couches and 2 love seat type armchairs. My sister and boy cousin slept on 2 of the lounge couches, and my other cousin and myself rolled out blankets and slept on the floor in front of the freestanding wood stove. We snuggled up, and the soft glow of the dimmed lamp allowed us to drift into peaceful sleep. Suddenly, my eyes shot open in the lightly lit room for some reason. I didn't hesitate waking up, but I hadn't heard anything that would have startled me. Everything was completely silent. How long had I been sleeping? It felt like a few hours at least, though my adrenaline wasn't helping indicate how much rest I'd received. My body and mind was on all systems go mode, and it was a surreal feeling. I'd never felt this kind of way before at my young age. My cousin and I were laying on our sides, and I was facing her back. Seeing her long black hair reassured me that maybe everything was alright, because no one else had woken up out of fear. But that's when I saw it out of the corner of my eye. To my disbelief, something was in the room with us. One of the armchairs sat next to one of the couches and a few feet in front of where my cousin's feet lay. There was a dark silhouette, a male figure, sitting in the chair. Not just normally sitting in it. No. His legs were pulled up to his chest and he was sitting in the chair sideways, his back leaning against one of the armrests. I slowly moved my gaze around the figure, not moving my head or body at all, only my eyes. I heard my pounding heart in my ears and felt my stomach flipping over itself violently. He was facing away and looking down, as if he was watching my other cousin sleep on the couch. He was extremely lean, and had straggly shoulder-length hair. There were multiple solutions my mind thought up to try and rationalize why this man was there. They raced through my head almost simultaneously. The first, he's a home intruder. But we're in the middle of nowhere. No one lives around here. And wouldn't he be stealing stuff or trying to kill us? I mean, he broke into the house. Okay, not burglary. That's it. It must just be a shadow and my mind is playing tricks on me. But it can't be. He is sitting in front of the lamp and I can't see any light through him. There's no way a shadow blocks out all that light and I can't see real features like his hair and arms. The last thought I had, sort of dumb, I know, but it crossed my mind that maybe it was Jesus. My parents never forced us to be religious, but we were taught certain aspects of Christianity and were encouraged to say the Lord's Prayer. I felt a sense of calmness rush over me at the thought of this being Jesus, and honestly, I only thought that because his long hair reminded me of all the depictions of the pictures of Jesus I had seen. As quickly as the calmness filled my body, it was disturbingly torn away from me. Right when the thought that this was maybe Jesus crossed my mind, this thing got up. It got up in such a strange manner though. If any of you have played The Sims before, you know how weird the avatars move. Like, to sit, the avatar will walk up to the chair, turn to one side, then turn again, and then sit. That is the only way that I've ever been able to describe how this thing moved. In that broken sort of unnatural pattern. It stood up, still facing away, then turned and faced forward, then turned around so it was facing me, and then sat in the same position as before, its legs brought up to its chest and its arms wrapped around its knees. I was utterly terrified. My cousin was less than a foot away though. I tried getting her attention. I think I managed to whimper her name quietly 2 times, until I was too afraid to keep trying. I didn't have the slightest clue of what to do. I contemplated running for my grandparents' room, but it would require running past this thing. I was in complete fear for my life and soul that I didn't want it to catch me. I contemplated just screaming and trying to get my sister and cousin's attention, but I kid you not, the only thing I thought was they're already dead. For some reason, that's the thought that was put into my head, that they were already all dead, and I was the last one that would be killed by this thing. As I'm having an eternal meltdown and fearing the eternal damnation of my soul, this thing begins to run its hands up and down its calves. But not just that, its nails were scratching at its skin, and I can still remember the exact sound of all its nails scraping against its flesh. Honestly, recalling it brings tears to my eyes, and I don't think I'll ever be able to forget that moment. As it was scratching itself, it was still watching me, though I couldn't make out exact facial features. Its head was positioned down as if it were looking at me, and I could definitely feel it though. I don't know how long this went on for. Time was so warped and messed up. I still can't figure out how long this encounter occurred. As he continued to scratch, I heard the squeak of the rocking armchair behind me, the noise you'd hear when someone stands up out of an old chair. The exact thought that went through my mind was, "You've got to be fucking kidding me. There's 2 of these?" I remember at that moment I stopped my breathing. I internally tried to meditate and calm myself, thinking that these entities are feeding off my fear. I remember telling myself to slow my heart rate, and actually, at that moment, I accepted my fate. Then, I felt the thing lay down behind me, as if it was spooning me. I never felt it touch me, but I felt the blankets behind me move. The biggest chill ran down my spine as I heard one elongated breath in my ear. Not only did I hear it, I felt my hair be brushed across my cheek as the air hit it. At this point, I was over it. All I could think to do was the Lord's Prayer, so I quickly joined my hands together and mentally recited the words which I had always brushed off and joked about before. And then, I was out. I don't remember anything except waking up to the daylight the next morning. I jumped up, looked around the living room, and instantly became an emotional pile of goo. I woke my sister and cousins and told them everything, and was so thankful that they were okay. I have considered multiple theories of what could have happened that night. Though shadow people and sleep paralysis would be a possible theory, I don't believe that that's what happened. I could still speak and move and haven't had reoccurring experiences like many people with sleep paralysis encounter. I honestly believe that I came into contact with demons that night. And just for reference, my parents did educate me a little on religion, but I was never told of demons before I experienced this. Though I don't belong to an organized religion today, I do believe that there are good and evil entities out there. The last few years, I have stopped trying to block this experience from my memory, and I have accepted it, and it's made me want to research and study more on demonology. Whatever really happened that night, I am forever thankful for the love and the light for protecting me and my family. This is a story that I was told by my mother when I was old enough to understand what had almost happened. I was only a few weeks old, and in those days, when a mother had given birth and taken their baby home, midwives were sent from the hospital to check on the baby and the mother once or twice a week max. My dad was working, so he wasn't home, and my mother had put me to sleep and was going about her business in the house. These visits were only every week or so, and she had just had 2 midwives come the morning one day before, and so knew immediately what happened next wasn't okay. She had a knock at the door, and so went to open the door. We lived in a close-knit community. There was rarely any threat to safety around there, but most of the people who lived by worked the whole day as they were young healthy couples, so it was deserted at that time of the day. My mother was greeted by a male and a female who were dressed in midwifery outfits with hospital bags and a very polite welcome asking if they could come in. They explained they had been sent by the hospital to check on her and the new baby. My mum let them in as they had all the professional clothes and badges and knew when my mother had given birth, etc. They even knew she had a little girl in my mother's name. Very convincing, but also all info that is easy to access. The male said he was going to take me upstairs and check over me, and the female would check over my mother downstairs. However, my mother didn't feel okay about them wanting to separate us, and she explained that a pair of midwives had already been that week, and said that she was going to ring the hospital to check as nobody had notified her that some more were coming just a day or 2 after. She also said she warned them that her husband, my dad, was on his way home from work and wouldn't be happy about this. At this point, the pair got very defensive and said that they would leave after being really pushy with my mother to separate the 2 of us. Finally, she got the pair to leave, who quickly changed their behavior to being calmed down and said not to worry, that it must have been a mistake and not to bother checking with the hospital when my mum was trying to contact the hospital. What was even weirder is that when my mum opened the door making them leave, there was another person waiting in the car outside who had the engine still running. When they left, my mother, scared, rang the hospital, who said they had not had any midwives scheduled to visit me and my mother, and that they always alert the mother if they're going to send midwives. They also said that they would never ask to separate the mother and the baby. They asked for descriptions of the midwives and said that they didn't have a male midwife at the hospital where I was born, and to contact the police. Terrified, my mother called my dad, who came straight home, and they reported it to the police. They took the description, but it never amounted to anything that we know of. Who knows what those pair were planning? It's just so creepy that they had gained access to all of the information. They must have been watching the house to know that my father wasn't home. They had even gone to the effort of having the uniform and the badges made. Thank God that my mother acted on her instinct and got them the hell out of the house and stuck to her guns. It's even more creepy to imagine what my life would be like now if they had got to carry out what they were planning. I don't believe it could have been a genuine mix-up. They had not followed standard protocol in warning my mother that they were visiting. They were very insistent on separating the 2 of us. They were rude and defensive when my mother challenged them, which is not acceptable behavior from a health professional. I honestly believe that we were really lucky that they left without a fuss, eventually. I'm not sure where or how to start this story. It doesn't have anything to do with the story, but I'm a female, At the time of this story, I was homeless and living out of a travel trailer. I'm originally from Massachusetts, but travelled all over the New England area while living in this trailer. I don't know if this has anything to do with what happened, but during the time this story took place, I was staying close to what is known as the Bridgewater Triangle. I'm not going to go into detail about what the Bridgewater Triangle is. If you Google it, you'll find out all you need to know. Anyway, this was back in 2009. I had just lost my job in January of that year, and after several months, I knew getting another would be tough. Now, I'm sort of a tomboy and loved camping, hiking and fishing. As I mentioned, I owned a small travel trailer and I pulled it around with my trusty Jeep Wrangler. I decided to conserve what money I had left and move into my travel trailer. I wasn't about to pay $1,200 a month for a place when I wasn't sure when I'd get a job again. Luckily for me, I was already kind of strict with money, so I had a decent amount saved. If I had kept that place, I might have drained my bank account and ended up in the trailer anyway, but with nothing. This was back during the recession after all. Anyway, I was stealth camping, and though the area I was in was heavily wooded, there were small populated pockets I had to worry about. If I wasn't careful, I could easily be found. A lot of the local cops were nice, but when it came to the state police, you had a 50-50 chance of running into a dickhead, at least in my experience. I was parked in a clearing off a small dirt trail that, from what I could tell, was barely used. I mean, it was used, but just enough to keep the grass from growing. To be honest, I don't know how I got both my Jeep and trailer down it. One afternoon, after locking up both the Jeep and the travel trailer, I took my mountain bike and went for a supply run. I wasn't getting a lot, just enough to get me through the night. About halfway down the trail, I got this uneasy feeling like I was being watched. So being the paranoid person that I am, I decided that I should head back to the trailer and leave. For all I knew, it could have been nothing, but I didn't want to chance it. I got back, threw my bike in the trailer and jumped into my Jeep. I somehow managed to get my Jeep and trailer turned around and made my way back to the main road I had pulled off from. If you're wondering, yes, I know the area well from going down there all my life. I pulled left and decided to go to a campground I favoured, stopping at a little Ma and Pa country-style store I was familiar with for supplies. I got to the campground several minutes later, checked in and went into my site. I didn't pay for lodging of any sort very often, so I didn't mind paying the $15 fee for the one night. Once I got to my campsite and set up, I decided to head to the nearby lake for a swim. Let me explain the area a little bit. It's important later. This particular camping ground section of the state park I was staying in is sort of an oval shape. It had the entrance to the east, the lake to the south, and several bathhouses, one being on the north side, not too far from my campsite, one on the west side, and one almost at the entrance. If you're in the campsite directly west of the north bathhouse, you can see a decent-sized clearing just beyond a small tree line. If you looked left, you can see my campsite. There is also a path that cuts the two campsites in half, acting as a sort of border between the two. The path that acts as a border between the two campsites runs from the road straight into that clearing and a little beyond. I'd also like to mention that the north bathhouse is the halfway mark through this camping section, and along with a road running parallel to it, there's a road that runs from it down to the lake. I used that road to get from my campsite to the lake. Anyway, it was about 8 in the evening when I decided to head back to my campsite and grab something to eat. I made a fire in the fireplace that came with the site and stood next to it to dry off a little, but before getting the food. A few minutes later, I went into my camper and got 4 hot dogs, buns and ketchup. I put the hot dogs on sticks and stuck them in the ground, angled over the fire. As they cooked, I went back into the trailer and decided to change into my jammies, a pair of swim shorts and a green t-shirt. I also grabbed a camping chair. For whatever reason, my campsite didn't come with a picnic table like the others, so I also brought out a small personal table to put my food on. By the time I set up, my hot dogs were done. I sat there and ate. By the way, it's true what they say, everything does taste better when you're camping. Halfway through eating, I got the eerie feeling that I was being watched again. I had totally forgotten about it. I brushed it off as either my imagination, curious animals, or other campers. Very cliché, I know. I should have known better. Shortly after 9 o'clock, when the other campers in the area seemed to be settling into their campsite, I decided to put my chair back into the camper and take a small walk down the path I mentioned earlier, the one leading to the field. I brought a joint with me and lit it while stepping onto the path. I made it to the middle of the field, staying on the path and enjoying my joint. Now, it's important to mention that the path continues up to another path that runs perpendicular to it. You can go left or right onto this path and go deeper into the woods if you wish. At this point, given the time, you can assume that it's dark. Personally, I find it relaxing, especially given my setting. The only light I have now comes from the moon in the camping area I just came from. I don't know how long I was standing there, maybe 5 minutes, when I get that feeling that I'm being watched again, and this time it bugs the shit out of me. I look to where the path ends and meets the cross trail. At first, I don't notice it, but I eventually notice a figure at the end of the trail, standing off to the left of the cross trail. I can only see the left half of their body, and it's as if they're trying to hide, but they're not doing a good job. The figure, due to the low light, looks like a very tall human, maybe 6.5 feet tall and thin, a little too thin, almost anorexic but not quite there. I decided that I wasn't going to deal with a creep, so I nonchalantly walked back to my camp while finishing my joint. I'm freaking out inside, but I don't want to provoke this jackass into attacking me. As I get to my trailer, I look back and can no longer see this person. I finish my joint and try to have a cigarette before actually going into my trailer. Halfway through the cig, I realize that the figure is still there, but closer. Through the thin tree line, I can see it. I then realize that there are actually several now, maybe 6 or 7, scattered just beyond the trees. I look around me and see maybe a dozen more scattered around my sight, just staring at me. All of them are standing just outside of the lighting of both the camp and the moonlight, all just seemingly dark figures. As high as I was, I decided not to freak out. I made sure my trailer was secure and got into my Jeep. I then drove out of this small camping area and headed to the main office. I knew the main office was closed, so I parked in the parking lot and slept there. I went straight to my trailer without looking around, went to my bed, laid down and fell asleep quickly. I woke up at about 5, made coffee and waited for the main office to open, and when it did, I checked out immediately. As I was just about to get into my Jeep, I looked into the woods just beyond my trailer, and there it was. A few feet into the forest, there was what you would expect a typical grey alien to look like. I didn't know how to react, so I pretended that I didn't see anything. I just got into my Jeep and drove off. I drove just north of Boston to a friend's house and stayed with them for about a week. I didn't tell them or anyone else what happened. Honestly, I don't care if you do or don't believe me. I know what I saw. I know that they were there, and I know that I haven't seen them since. Well, at least not that I can remember anyway. I have been camping since, just not to this particular campground again though. I've also since gotten a job working at a zoo and gotten a new place. My only request to you all is please don't be ignorant to the fact that there are things out there that we just can't explain. Of course, have a healthy amount of skepticism, but don't let it make you ignorant or blind to your ability to be open-minded. I always believed in the existence of extraterrestrials and other things that we would consider paranormal, or at least their possibility anyway, but I never thought for 1 minute that I would be a witness. The area I live in has never really been anything to worry about. I was never anxious when going about my business when it was pretty late. Me and my friend Phil always used to have sleepovers. This was mainly him coming over mine, as I didn't really like his mum. Quite honestly, she was a bitch. So me and Phil, almost every night, would sneak out of the house while my family was asleep and go over to the park near where I lived. Before this particular time, we had gone around there multiple times at around midnight, so we were pretty confident in being there and knowing when something was wrong. That said, we hardly ever came across anything too bad. The worst thing we ever witnessed was a drug deal, so myself and Phil didn't come across anything too traumatizing. But all this changed one night. Myself and Philip had been preparing for sneaking out like we always did. I grabbed the torch, my phone and my keys, trying my best not to make too much noise as my family was asleep. As myself and Phil were getting ready to leave, he fell silent. I looked at him and watched him pull a knife from the drawer and look at me with a brave face and say, "Just in case, mate." I then watched him slide the knife between his hip and his belt. I acknowledged him and we left. As we were trekking through the dimly lit streets of my estate, I wondered why Philip had actually decided to take the knife. The only time we brought one along was the first time we snuck out, and we hadn't taken a knife since then, so I found it a little weird. But I figured it was just him being careful and forgot about it. I used the torch to light up the way as we navigated along the path. The path was surrounded by bushes and trees on each side, and I made sure to scan them carefully. As we crossed the bridge, Philip uttered some military-sounding nonsense. This was something he regularly did, and I played along. When we had crossed the bridge that lies up high over a motorway, we scanned all around. The layout of the place is simple but hard to put into words. I'll do my best to describe it as I go. Myself and Phil followed the dirt path directly after the bridge. This path goes around a couple of dirt hills that we knew to watch our footing with. At the end of the path, there's a rusty old gate. Past this gate is a pretty spacious field. "Hey mate, I think I'm going to take a shit," Phil whispered as we crossed the field. I laughed slightly and reply, "You're already shit, so it'll blend in." He called me a twat jokingly, but after a few seconds, he came to a dead stop and froze. "Phil?" I asked him. He didn't look scared, just wary. "There's people," he replied. I decided to look where he was looking, and I see two pretty faint lights moving slowly along the road ahead of the field. "Shit, yeah," I reply. There really was two moving flashlights. We agreed that it was probably some late night joggers, or some guys doing the same as us. We didn't feel in danger or anything. Phil turns on the torch on his phone and holds it like a pistol, and we continue walking towards this road ahead. As we come right up to the road and the people come into view, our theory was proven right as a male and female jogger both jogged past us. Because we were so close, I could see that the guy had black hair and a beard, and the girl was quite a sight. She had a pretty face and was slim, but in a sexy way. I watched her backside and light blue short shorts as they went past. Phil poked my shoulder and reminded me that I had a girlfriend. I sighed and moaned about it jokingly. Myself and Phil turned right and walked down the road a bit. We shone both of our torches at the wooden park as we passed it, just to be sure. We saw nothing as we went through the wooden park, past the bushery and the mini-golf course. We saw nothing as we went past the lake and the children's park. We then chilled on the benches near the park for a while, occasionally scanning the area and shining the torch to make sure that we were in fact alone. Eventually we decided to go over to the dam, so we took off in that direction. We made our way past the many trees and bushes, and followed the bridge left until we crossed the bridge just before the dam. Phil leaned over the rail and looked over into the massive lake that we partially passed earlier. I pulled him and told him that we should carry on. We shone our torches all around as we walked along the dam. The dam was basically a long path with a stone barrier that stopped you from falling over the mini cliff-like structure that led into the massive lake. We continued with our caution as we walked along the path, surrounded by darkness. We both looked left and were leaning over the stone barrier, admiring the beauty of the lake at night, when we heard a footstep and the faint rustling of grass. Myself and Phil immediately whipped our heads around and looked straight ahead. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the overgrown grass on the right side of the path, as well as the old hexagonal-shaped abandoned music stand. We edged forwards, slowly. As we get close enough to the music stand, we both notice orange light from behind it, shining bright light into the grass and path. "Fire?" Phil whispered. There were other people here. We both flanked to the left slightly until we could clearly see the fire. It burned really bright. This was no shitty fire made by your average teenager. It was burning really well, and the starter knew what they were doing. For a moment, I just stared at the fire. That is, until Phil whispered, "Shit." Immediately, I looked forwards. It was a man, seemingly wearing a hoodie and black clothing. Myself and Phil looked at him for about 3 seconds, until he lunged and stomped forwards. We took off and both ran the fuck out of there. I turned my head around and shined the bright light of my torch behind us. It seemed to stop and blind the guy, so I whipped back around and both myself and Phil booked it. We didn't look back until we reached the benches near the park. Both of us turned our torches off and looked around for the guy. After about 4 seconds, we saw the bastard running straight towards us, accompanied by other footsteps. I felt my chest turn cold. Phil and I seemed to have the same idea as we both ran for the park. We both scrambled past the gate of the park and we hid behind the wooden fence that surrounded the park. The fence was pretty tall and dark enough to keep us hidden, but there were gaps between the fence panels. I shot my hood up and watched through the gaps. I'm guessing they didn't see us dart into the park as the hooded figures stopped and looked around. My stomach was smashing against my chest as I dreaded that they would come closer. But they didn't. After about 15 seconds of them looking, the hooded guys walked away into the shadows. I finally breathed out. From behind me, I could hear Philip sneaking towards me. We both stood up and looked at each other. We agreed that it was time to get the fuck back home before something serious happened. We blew out air and asked if each other was alright. As we hopped over the fence surrounding the gate, I heard loud footsteps running on the gravel behind us. We both looked back to see one of the hooded guys sprinting towards us. We looked at each other and legged it. We ran blindly into the darkness, not looking. When we approached a point where we could hide, we darted behind cover. We hid behind a small building, between bushes. I was fairly confident that we were hidden. As we heard the guy's footsteps slow down to a walk, he appeared out of the darkness. We still couldn't see his face because of his hood. He started walking slowly towards us. I whispered to Phil, "Let's just leg it, man." But he replied with, "Wait, I've got an idea." I didn't have any faith in him, but decided to see what he would do because I had no better ideas. He burst out of the shadows and exclaimed, "I've got a knife! Back off!" It seemed to stop the guy. Now having confidence in Phil's plan, I also rose up and shone the torch onto the knife so the guy could see it clearly. Phil, while the light illuminated him and the knife, lunged forward and made a stabbing motion towards the guy. This made the guy step backwards, and then he took off. Instantly, myself and Phil ran for it. For all we know, the guy could have took off to get a weapon or get the rest of his pack, but whatever the case, we didn't care. We saw an opening and took it. Myself and Phil ran all the way back to mine. I congratulated him on his good idea as well as his bravery. He replied with, "To be honest, man, I thought I was going to get killed." Thinking back on the night, I am sure glad that Phil brought that knife with him, because if he didn't, I don't know what the fuck could have happened to us. Before I tell my story, I'd just like to say that I've never shared this before and that I'd like to remain anonymous. I'm a big fan of Busta and want him to tell my story though. I should also note that I'm a Polish woman living in Ireland. It will make sense why I'm saying that later. When I was 25, I discovered that my boyfriend of 3 years was cheating on me. I found out about that when I was 9 weeks pregnant with our first baby. I was heartbroken the night I found out, and we argued all night long. It was around 5:30 in the morning when I couldn't take any more fighting, so I stormed out of the house to go for a walk to clear my head. It was summer, so it was just starting to get bright outside. There was a wooded area behind my housing estate that led to a beautiful area with a river. I love going there to clear my head. It always made me feel so peaceful, so I headed there to think about everything that was going on. I got to the river and sat down beside it, trying to calm myself down and figure out what I was going to do, when, out of nowhere, the guy just walked up beside me.
"Nice morning, isn't it?"
He said to me while smiling. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, looked totally normal and didn't give off any creeper vibes. So even though I was upset, I smiled back and said, "Yeah, it's really beautiful." When he heard my Polish accent, he said,
"Oh, you're foreign. I love your accent."
And he continued to make small talk and ask me about where I was from, etc. I chatted with him for a few minutes and then decided to head back home. So I said goodbye and he smiled as I started walking away. I had only walked back into the wooded area when I heard footsteps fast approaching me from behind. I turned around to see the same guy walking towards me, not smiling anymore. I asked him, are you okay? Not knowing what else to say, but he didn't reply. By now, I was nervous, and I turned around and started to run, but I wasn't fast enough. And before I knew it, I was tackled onto the ground. He flipped me onto my back and told me that he thought I was beautiful and that I was a bitch for leaving him at the river. I was so afraid, and all I could think to say was, "I'm sorry, but I need to get home now." He laughed at me and told me that I wasn't going home, that I would never go home. At this point, I started to cry and scream and tried to get up, but he punched me in the face and my nose immediately started to pour out blood. I begged him to let me go and told him I was pregnant. And what he said next made my heart sink. He said,
"I'll be getting rid of 2 foreigners from my country then, won't I? If you make this difficult or try to scream, I'll kill you slowly. I have a knife."
I sobbed so hard that my tears were stinging my cheeks. My mind was racing as he was pulling down my leggings and touching my private parts. I needed to get away. I needed to save my baby. After a few moments, he was trying to kiss me, and I managed to get my leg up and kicked him as hard as I could in the balls. He immediately fell over in pain, and I got up and ran as fast as I could, screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't care that I had no leggings on. All I cared about was getting away. I never looked back. I just kept running. I got to my street and my boyfriend heard my screams and came running out to me. He looked completely horrified to see me naked from the waist down and with a busted nose. I collapsed into his arms, crying, while trying to tell him what happened. We called the police and they showed up about 15 minutes later. They took my statement and a description of the guy and searched the area for him, but they didn't find him anywhere. I was taken to hospital for my injuries and to check my baby. I was worried sick that what happened would result in me losing my baby, but thank God my baby was still alive and well. It's been 2 years since this happened to me, and now I have a really beautiful little girl. The man who tried to rape and kill me was never found. I still have trouble dealing with what happened. I suffer with panic attacks and can no longer take walks in wooded areas or anywhere that isn't well populated. I also moved house because I was terrified that I would see that guy again and that he would try to kill me. I broke up with the father of my baby because I couldn't forgive him for cheating either. This was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced, and it just goes to show you that even if someone seems very normal and friendly, you really don't know what they're capable of. I am happy to say that I'm with a very caring guy who I can trust, and I'm trying to move on with my life. And hopefully, one day, I can forget about this horrific experience.